Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Gaming with me, Tony Mo, and we're here today to discuss, to revisit in some ways, what I consider to be one of the greatest Battlefield expansions, if not the greatest Battlefield expansion of all time. I am, of course, talking about Battlefield Bad Company 2's Vietnam expansion, which released back in 2010 for just $15, or 1,200 Microsoft points as I remember purchasing it over on my Xbox 360. The Vietnam expansion would be absolute bang for your buck, with 5 new maps, 6 new vehicles, and 15 new weapons. Not to mention an entirely new setting and era. We're going back to the Vietnam War, something that directly tied in with Bad Company 2's single-player story. All in all, the Vietnam expansion was fantastically executed and delivered. I think that's why it was so well received, and frankly, why it was such a great expansion. It was clear that DICE went above and beyond and had the opportunity to put a lot of love and a lot of detail into the Vietnam expansion, and it really stood out when you played it. It genuinely felt like a departure from the base Bad Company 2 experience. It gave you enough reason to want to step away from BC2's vanilla and go into Vietnam every now and then. Wonderful, wonderful level of details, outstanding map design, not to mention, again, the new vehicles and the new weapons. So why don't we start by talking about the new weapons, because I always felt that DICE did more than just throw 15 new weapons into your arsenal. They made sure that those weapons themselves were some of the most iconic and important weapons from the Vietnam War era to start, but they also added a lot of wonderful little details to the weapons. Things like a weapon sling being wrapped around the AK-47 rather than just not existing at all. They had, for example, a cloth wrap, a fabric wrap, potentially acting as camouflage around one of the sniper rifles. They also included a very specific 40mm blooper grenade launcher with orange and black tiger stripe camo, which can be seen in the film Apocalypse Now, a very dark scene during the film Apocalypse Now, but that is the exact 40mm blooper grenade launcher with the exact black and orange tiger stripe camo from that film. I always thought that was absolutely fantastic. And as someone who's a big fan of that film, it put a huge smile on my face to see that inside of the Vietnam expansion. Now, of course, when it came to vehicles, we had new tanks, patrol boats, which were a big part of the Vietnam War, as well as the Huey helicopter, pretty much the most iconic helicopter in Vietnam War history. I think, though, when we talk about the core of what made the Vietnam experience stand out from the base Bad Company 2 experience, it wasn't just the addition of new things. It was the way in which those things were implemented, particularly the 5 new maps, of which all of them managed to capture the... Let's just say they managed to capture important elements of the types of combat scenarios that were fought during the Vietnam War. Particularly the map that you guys are seeing in today's video, Elevation Change. More often than not, the Americans were fighting uphill against the Vietnamese, who were dug in, basically using, a king of the hill style defense tactic. It was brutal, and it led to some of the bloodiest battles in the Vietnam War. DICE made sure that that was a key element to many of the locations and maps inside of the Vietnam expansion. What that meant, alongside of the jungles and the rivers snaking throughout all of the different maps where patrol boats could be extremely relevant in a game mode like Conquest, was that you had an experience that felt drastically different from the base Bad Company 2 game. There was enough variety in the gunplay, in the combat scenarios, and in the firefights that you would engage in because of the map design to make you say, hey, how about we jump out of BC2 this weekend and go play Vietnam? Did I mention there was a flamethrower? Yeah, that went a long way as well. DICE really did kill it with this expansion. It was just so well honed and so well crafted across the board. I remember having just as much, if not more fun with the Vietnam expansion than I did with Bad Company 2's base game. And not for 1 second did I miss any of the modern amenities that existed in the base game when I was playing Vietnam. I completely forgot about them. I simply didn't care because Vietnam was executed so well. Now, DICE went one step further when it came to the Vietnam expansion, and they included 2 key components that really made this expansion special, that made it intoxicating, that turned the atmosphere up to 12. Number 1 was the inclusion of licensed music tracks from the Vietnam War era, including things like CCR and Ride of the Valkyries. Number 2 were brand new voiceovers that were recorded for both the American and Vietnam forces that were based on authentic communications from the Vietnam War. So this meant at the start of a match and at the end of the match, you would hear actual radio broadcasts coming from each of the respective factions. You might hear an American radio broadcaster talking about where and what the GIs are doing inside of Vietnam. American GIs are pushing into hill so-and-so. And at the end of that battle, say the American forces lost and the Vietnam forces won, you might hear that same broadcaster say something like, the American GIs were held back by Vietnam forces at hill so-and-so. The battle continues, and it was fantastic. It was this great level of immersion, this extra level of atmosphere that went such a long way. It was a great departure from what we had come to know from Bad Company, you know, both 1 and 2, as just the Battlefield theme. That was what you got in your Battlefield experience previously. You got to hear some Battlefield theme music, and that was that. You know, they had completely jumped out of that and tried to encapsulate as much of the Vietnam War music and a lot of the important details surrounding it as they possibly could. So let's talk about that music, because there were 29 tracks in total, and those 29 tracks weren't just played at random or during the menu. They could be played by players in-game through loudspeaker systems attached to their Huey. So you could pretty much recreate that very, very iconic scene from Apocalypse Now with Ride of the Valkyries. Or you could storm into a village with John Fogerty screeching out Fortunate Son. It was a wonderful extra layer that DICE did not need to include in the Vietnam expansion, but they did, and it went such a long way. Can you think of any game that has really done anything since then in such a fashion, especially when we talk about something that is aiming to be historical? Like, oh yeah, this is just, you know, look at, we're going back to World War II, we're going back to Vietnam. They really went above and beyond with this, and in a lot of ways it reminded me of all of the great music that we got in the old Medal of Honor games and so on and so forth. But that music and those radio broadcasts, they took things up a notch, and I really appreciate DICE doing that in Vietnam. It's why, without a doubt, the Vietnam expansion is one of the greatest, if not the greatest, Battlefield expansion we have ever seen. Now, I should mention that Hardline actually did something similar. It's unfortunate that the game was delivered in the way it was rather than being delivered like a piece of deal or expansion, much like Vietnam was, because they did in fact include music that could be played over the radio stations in cars. They also had the TV broadcaster talking about the conflict that would have been going on between the police and the drug dealers, or the police and the robbers. That was awesome, and it really did help bring Hardline to life a little bit more. Had it potentially been delivered in the way that Vietnam was, maybe it would have sold better. Maybe it would have a bigger following today. Now, World War I and Battlefield 1 are just around the corner. And I think at this point, DICE and EA are really dead set on just continuing with the core Battlefield brand, making sure that it's all unified. Battlefield music here, Battlefield music there. It's unfortunate that we won't boot up Battlefield 1, or at least I don't think we will, and hear music from the World War I era. Imagine wrapping up a match on St. Quentin Scar and hearing actual propaganda, radio propaganda, or seeing film propaganda that was actually used by the respective factions during World War I. How fantastic would that be? I'm going to enjoy Battlefield 1, don't get me wrong, but playing Bad Company 2's Vietnam expansion has made me really think about the things that I'm going to miss when BF1 does release, the things that they could have done had they looked back at their success with the Vietnam expansion. Thank you guys so much for watching. I would love to hear how you feel and how you felt about the Vietnam expansion. Is it something special to you? Let me know why, and if it is, throw it down in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.